Started by going. Okay, that's us on now, so I'll get started. Hi guys, welcome back to the Kapo Starky Rugby podcast. Today I've got with me a pleasure to introduce Nathan Johns. Nathan is a writer for Spiral Rugby. I'll leave a link to that in the description below, as I do with all my guests' work. Nathan, how you doing, mate? Good to see you.
Yeah, good to be on here. Thanks for inviting me, Carl.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, I think we're probably mainly going to talk about the Lions, but if things go elsewhere, then that's absolutely fine. But no, I found your article quite interesting on it. A lot of points I agree with. Some I might have personally dubious opinions on, but that's the fun of chatting about rugby, isn't it? So, what are your thoughts on the 37-man squad that have been picked to go to South Africa in the summer?
I mean, it was quite an interesting experience watching that broadcast where the squad was announced. I mean, first of all, it dragged on far too long, and I tuned in. I think it was what they said 9 minutes past 12 was supposed to be the captaincy announcement, so that's when I tuned in, and then Alan Wynne-Jones popped up in his hologram.
Yeah, he just teleported himself in.
So the whole experience was just a bit mental and a bit mad. So I was probably quite in quite a frustrated mood anyway when by the time they got round to announcing the squad, and they started with the backs and they went in alphabetical order by surname. So the second name read out was Bundy Aki, and straight away, I think everyone had this reaction. Straight away, you knew you were in for an interesting next 5 minutes or so as they called out the rest of the squad. I mean, it's always a futile game of guessing the squad, isn't it? And there's always surprises in my head. I think I remember being slightly less surprised 4 years ago, but maybe there's just a bit of recency bias going on there. But yeah, there's loads of talking points. I'm an Irishman. I'm a Leinster and Ireland fan. There are players who I would have liked to have seen in there, and equally there are Irish guys in there who I am probably surprised a little bit to be in there. I think 8 Irishmen in the whole squad is probably as good as we could have hoped for, but it is most definitely not the 8 that I saw going. So there was loads of surprises, and not just from the Irish side as well. I mean, I actually think the biggest shock of all, putting away my Irish bias for a second, was no John Davies. I was convinced that he would take one of the 3 slightly smaller ball-playing 13s out of Davies, Ringrose and Slade. So the fact that none of those, and then no Davies, I think, from Gatland's point of view and his background in the Welsh squad, that was my biggest surprise from the announcement.
Yeah, I'm actually, to be honest, I'm not surprised with Bundy Aki, because we know Gatland, he loves to have that bash up 12. Obviously with Wales, with Jamie Roberts in 2017, Tour took Ben Teo, and obviously 2013 Manu Tuolangi went as well. So I wasn't surprised he was looking for that kind of centre. Regards to Jonathan Davis, I'm probably in the same boat as you. I mean, he's not been playing well for the Scarlets lately, but I did think that just because Gatland knows him and knows how to get the best out of him, or generally has when he coached him with Wales and the Lions, that he would think, okay, I can, he's been a little bit off, but I can get the best out of him. But he's just decided to not take him at all. But as I think we know, you obviously being Irish would know, Gatland's not got some balls. He's not afraid to make tough selections, some of which I can tell by your face you're probably still not quite forgiven. Like I said, I'm not surprised they've gone for a bash up centre. As to whether it was Bundy Aki, again, I think with Manu Tuolangi still, the injury Manu Tuolangi's had, it's not a sort of injury you just recover from and then you just find your peak form in time for the Lions. Like, it's going to be, I think he still needs, despite what Alex Sanderson said, I'm still thinking he needs a good few months before he gets himself back to near the level he wants to be as a player after that. But yeah, not surprised the bash up centre.
I think the Manu thing tells you that he's in a much worse position than Courtney Laws. The two of those guys are in very similar boats, having not played for a while. Obviously, Manu's a bit longer because I think Courtney got a few games in the Six Nations, didn't he?
He was both the first 2, and then he got injured after that. Yeah,
exactly. So I think that part of me thinks there's a bit of inconsistency there about the policy with selection and injuries, and picking guys based on legacy and what they've done for Gats in the past. And part of me thinks, well, maybe maybe it's the nature of the injury, and Gatland clearly knows more than we do, and maybe what he's hearing from Sale and England physios or whoever Manu's with is probably a little bit different there. But I think the Bundy thing is interesting because he's always been that bash it up centre. I think when he first came over to Connacht from the Chiefs in New Zealand, I think he showed a lot more willingness to play at a contact, and he kind of became a cult hero over in Connacht for his ability to win the gain line and then free his hands. It's something he's probably not done as much for Ireland. Granted, it's much harder to do that on the international level. And then, of course, there's the Joe Schmidt factor. He played a lot on the Joe Schmidt, and the consensus seems to be that Joe didn't encourage that type of play. So, yeah, I think you're right. It speaks a lot to how Gatland wants to play. My one concern is that he did something similar in 2017 by picking Ben Teo, played him in the first test, and then just abandoned that particular crash it up 12 for the rest of the tour, and the rest of the tour went reasonably well when he went away from the bash up 12 to a 10 and 12 to a Sexton Farrell as a 10-12. So I think he's left himself open with both options. I just thought it was interesting that Bundy Aki was the crash it up 12, because for me, for Leinster, Henshaw does a lot of that and then a little bit more on the ball and in the wide channels. But it's interesting. He's definitely left himself with both options: the crash it up 12 and then the 2 10s on the park.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, though. I mean, because as you say, Robbie Henshaw is capable of that role as well, but he's definitely got a lot more variety to his game. But just like listening to Gatland, I think he at the moment, this obviously might change depending on form of the tour, etc. I think he at the moment does have in his mind it's going to be Aki at 12 and Henshaw at 13. But I'm just gauging that just by listening to some of the interviews he's given afterwards.
It was what he said. He specifically referenced how Aki and Henshaw went well against England in that last game of the Six Nations. And that was interesting for 2 reasons. One, because, I think the whole Irish team played well that day. So it was interesting that he picked out Aki. It's been a while since I watched that game, and obviously Gatland watches it in a very different way and with a lot more detail than I do. Yeah, I agree. Obviously, Henshaw was fantastic the whole tournament, not just that game. So look, he obviously likes that combination. That's a combination that's worked for Ireland a lot in the past. Those two played a lot whenever Gary Ringrose has been injured. So it's definitely, and it's interesting that he referenced that by name. And the other thing that I took from that was Gatland loves picking based on the last game of the Six Nations. If you remember in 2017, Peter O'Mahony demolished the English line out and cost them a Grand Slam. And a few months later, he's captaining the first Test match. Word on the street was he wasn't going to go on the plane, let alone captain, if it wasn't for that game. All of a sudden, is that what's happened with Aki? So it's interesting. So Gatland puts a lot of clout into big one-off performances, which is very interesting.
Absolutely. Similar in 2013 as well, of course, with Wales, England. We ended up picking 15 Welshmen for that tour. So, but yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a great point. Yeah, but I think that's, like I said, that's maybe what's in his mind. Again, what we'll see. I think form's going to come into it a lot, and obviously on tour, there's always going to be people pick up injuries. We'll just go straight into the sort of I don't know how to describe it really. A sort of debate at 10. Obviously, reading by your article, you're pretty gutted. Old Johnny's not going.
Yeah, I wrote that pretty much straight away after hearing the announcement. So the emotions are probably flying high a little bit. I've had more time to think about it.
We've all been there, mate.
Yeah, we have. I think there's 4 excellent out halves across the 4 countries, so someone had to miss out. Some people I saw might have been saying they might take 3 10s and then Farrell as a 12. I think based on the fact that he's picked someone like Aki shows that his first plan is not to play Farrell at 12. So I think that was, in hindsight, a little bit far-fetched. So look, somebody was going to have to miss out, which means you're going to be looking for reasons to leave someone behind. And if you're going to look for reasons to leave someone behind, Sexton and the fact that he puts his body on the line probably a little bit more than other 10s. I think Russell does it a lot as well, to be fair. Farrell does it as well, but illegally, as we all know, he's got trouble with his tackling technique. But sorry, cheap shots aside, I firmly believe that Sexton is one of the better defensive 10s out there. He had that run a few years ago when it seems like Matthew Bastareaud seemed to keep concussing him every time they played because of his tackle. He seemed to have sorted that out. He went through the last few years without getting concussed as much, but he's quite an upright tackler. He looks to hold up the ball. So as an out half, as not the biggest man in the park, you're opening yourself up for trouble there. And he went through a period, the Six Nations, he got away with it by and large, apart from the Wales game. And then obviously the cost in the France game. But then he came back and was absolutely fantastic in 2 massive games against Scotland and England. And then he got into trouble again against Exeter.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure how much Leinster rugby your listeners watch, but something similar happened in a big Leinster-Munster game back in January. He went off very early with a head knock. So if you're looking for a reason to leave someone out of those 4 world-class 10s out, you can look at Sexton's durability and say, yeah, maybe just, the Boks are going to run straight down his throat. DLND, Vermeulen, whoever it is, straight down his throat, and he's in trouble there. But what I disagreed with the logic was they said it's the durability over a tour. And I think I don't necessarily buy that with Sexton, because Sexton has shown he doesn't need a run of games to play himself into form. He's dropped in and out of big games for Leinster and Ireland constantly and delivered time and again. On a Lions tour, realistically, you need to play well in two or three of the warm-up games, maybe even less, if you're in the pole position for the starting shirt, and then get a run and go in the test. And so I don't necessarily think you needed to say Sexton needs to be durable to play over and over again over the tour. That being said, I completely understand why he's taken Biggar. Biggar's the form 10 out of all of the moment, purely just because he's playing. I think Johnny probably finished the Six Nations better than Biggar, but hasn't really played much since then, whereas Biggar has been doing excellently for Northampton. Farrell, that's 100% a legacy pick based on what Gavin believes he can do, because, himself and the rest of the England squad struggled, and then he's been playing championship rugby. Finn Russell, I love watching Finn Russell play. I think he's a fantastic player. I definitely bought into the line of thought that he's not a Gatlin player, that Warren Gatlin with his Warren ball, big crash ball boys up and at him. I didn't think, not so much risk-free rugby, because, the Lions will play an attacking brand of rugby. We all remember the wonder try Sean O'Brien scored in 2017 when they ran the London pitch. They have that in the locker. So I didn't necessarily think that Gatlin would go straight jacket 10 game manager. I did think there was room for him to go with someone like Russell, who brings something a little bit different. But I did think that Russell's track record of high profile mistakes might just work against him. So in the same way, if you're looking for a reason to leave out Johnny, you go durability. If you're looking for a reason to leave out Russell, you go, well, look at the Champions Cup final. He threw 2 intercepts, one of which was ran back. Granted, though, he was the reason Racing were still in the game at the same time. So it's a juggling. Personally, actually, a bit of something from a bit of left field. If you're going to take that kind of guy who's going to maybe chase the game off the bench or something like that, or add a little bit different, I'm surprised Gatlin didn't take Callum Sheedy, with the Welsh option. I think Callum Sheedy played excellently. But I mean, remember that he kind of had that, as good as Biggar was during the Six Nations. There were 2 or 3 games where Biggar was yanked off after an hour, and Callum Sheedy had the last 2 minutes tore it up. Remember against England, Sheedy.
He was brilliant.
Brilliant. So I thought, and also he doesn't have that history of high profile mistakes, and he plays that attacking brand of rugby. Pat Lam at Bristol has him doing some wonderful things. And of course, there was the Welsh angle with Gatland. So that was my left field alter. But at the same time, look, the debate is with Sexton and Russell, it's, well, which is worse, the lack of durability or maybe the fact that he might make a big high profile mistake? And I think Gregor Townsend in that selection meeting said, well, look, he didn't do any of those in the Six Nations. That probably was the big call. And who in that selection meeting is fighting Sexton's corner? Robin McBride, the forwards coach, is the Leinster forwards coach. Mm-hmm. I don't know. My honest opinion is he might have been fighting Sexton's corner, but I don't think it would have been as hard as Townsend was fighting Russell's corner. So they had a call there to make. I'm not surprised they've gone with a slightly different 10. I think if Sexton had played some of the Leinster's European games, I think he would have had a really good shout, because he was the form 10 at the end of the Six Nations. Don't forget, as you know, he slotted a last-minute penalty to beat Scotland.
Yeah.
Not often that happens in international rugby. Not often that you have last-minute plays like that. So he's a big game player, and then against England, he was fantastic. So it's 6 one way, half a dozen the other. I can agree with the logic. I don't agree. I can understand the logic. I don't agree with it entirely, but he had a 50-50 call, and you can see why he made it.
Yeah. But you touched on a bit with Farrell just being there for legacy. I'm one of those who I thought Farrell would go, but I wouldn't have picked him just basically because of form. And again, like playing in the championship, like how can you? I don't know how can you gauge that because it is a completely different level to what they're going to be used to obviously in South Africa. And during the Six Nations, I thought Farrell was mostly pish, to be honest with you. And as we know, I think like that's the thing people that actually does annoy me a bit is people talk Finn like he's a big liability, and he can still sometimes have those moments in games where he is a bit. I'll agree with that, but then like they're not looking at what Farrell does, like with the fact he still can't tackle properly to save his life sometimes, and that I don't know. It just kind of like folk are just kind of looking at one way and not the other. But the thing is, like about Finn though, is he is that sort of a maverick player, if you like, and he has and that's a reason I think he should have gone. Is he does have the ability in games just to change it on his head, like he can throw a spectacular pass, or he can just create space or put a wee kick through and set teammates away. But I think I have to say his more like sort of conservative side of his game has improved a lot against France. If you notice, like his tactical kicking was excellent that day, and when we were down to 14 men when Stuart Hogg was yellow carded, there were times he was just like sort of running the clock down a bit, like he tried a drop goal from the halfway line, which just looking at on the surface you might think, what the are you doing here? But he actually was sensible because even though he missed it, he ran the clock down, and France had to kick it out from their own 22. So that side of his game is really improving. I know in that particular match, the gloss got taken off a bit by the fact he got a red card, but it's still like, you just think like his all-round game, I think, does bring something a bit different to the other 10 options. But I think with the durability thing with Sexton, as you said, like sort of I take what he says as a valid point, but I also think the fact he's not really completed 3 consecutive matches in 2 or 3 years, something like that. Is that right? I think so. I read that somewhere.
I don't know the stat, and I think if that is the stat, that's pretty damning against Johnny. And again, I take the point, and I can understand it. It doesn't make it any easier to swallow from that point of view, though. And I agree also with you that the Finn Russell mistake, liability, whatever you want to call it, I agree that that does get overhyped a little bit. I don't know. I just remember watching him at the end of the England game, trying to take a left-footed drop goal and skewing it straight into an England player, and just things like that pop up into your head. And I agree, though, but equally, some people will mention that, and then they'll say, "Oh, Farrell should go," but then, how is he likely to hit someone in the head and get sent off? I don't know. It's clearly I doubt that Owen Farrell's tackle technique was as much of a worry for the coaching staff as the liability of Finn Russell to make a mistake. And I don't necessarily think he is a liability. I agree with you, it's overplayed, but I suspect that didn't come into it as much. And they've obviously made the decision that they want something a little bit different to Farrell and bigger, and obviously Sexton with Finn, what he brings, and that Farrell's tackle technique, Finn's previous history of making the odd mistake, they're more willing to take that on board rather than the potential that Sexton might have a big South African run down his channel, and because he puts his body on the line, he gets battered. It's fair enough. I think if one of Bigger or Farrell gets injured straight away, Sexton's the first man up. I'd be interested to see if anything happens to Russell, do they call Johnny, or do they go to someone like a Callum Sheedy to kind of have that more? I think that would be a really interesting scenario.
Yeah, and I think that would depend also where they are in the tour. Like if there's getting closer to test time, you would go for the more reliable pick, which again, if he's fit, providing, you would go for Johnny Sexton and just fit in his experience. And as you say, he is a big, and as everyone's been saying, he is a big game player. Like, he seems to have that freakish ability to turn up the big games. But I don't know, on the flip side of it, I think just how many knocks he does take, the health factor, does that come into play as well, especially against South Africa, where, like, as we've been discussing, they don't exactly go light on their tackling whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, Johnny's done well against South Africa in the past. It's in recent history. I mean, granted, Ireland didn't play the 2019, Rassie Erasmus version of the box, but they played them years before that. They played them 2 or 3 years in a row, and guys like Jesse Creel would have been playing. They would have had big players there, and Johnny was orchestrated some big wins against them. So, Yeah, he gets unlucky. Historically, when he gets these injuries and he doesn't complete games, they tend to come in batches. Like I mentioned before, he was in trouble playing against France with Bastereau. I mean, he was sat down for 12 weeks, I think, because he got 3 concussions in a row or something like that. And then for a few years, the issue didn't flare up. So it tends to happen to him in batches, and it's kind of, when it rains, it pours and that type of thing. And I think it's just the timing of this particular run of not just head knocks. There's been a calf injury in there, I think, and things like that, which is obviously not good for a kicker. Unfortunately, his history is that they tend to be in batches, and that's been bad timing for him on this front.
Yeah. I mean, do you think the age factor is maybe a thing as well? Because he's going to be 36 in the summer, and he's not getting any younger, really.
I don't think so. I think his ability to perform is not going to deteriorate because of age between the end of the England game and the first test in South Africa. I think the only thing that's held him back there is durability and the fact that he hasn't been on the park, whereas guys like Dan Biggar have been on the park for Northampton and have been tearing it up. So no, the age thing isn't going to be an issue this summer. Will it be an issue next season? I suspect not, just because of my faith in him and how he generally looks after himself pretty well off the pitch. On the pitch is where he throws his body about more than he should. But so no, the short answer to that is I don't think age would have been a concern for this tour. I'd be more worried about the age profile for the World Cup than for this Lions tour.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. And obviously, he's going to be 38 at the World Cup, should he make it, of course. So that's but different conversation for a different day, I was going to say. But yeah, could move on to the forwards a bit. Obviously, like from Leinster fan point of view, must be proud. Obviously, we all knew Tag Furlong was going to be going, but also Andrew Porter and Jack Conan in there. Proud of how they've done. Or surprised at all?
Surprised? No, as in I'm not as surprised that those two went as someone like Bundy went. I think Bundy was more of a surprise than those two. In hindsight, maybe not, like you said, with the power factor, but delighted. I mean, it's a big compliment to Leinster and Ireland that their first choice and second choice tight heads have gone. Gatland actually said that Porter went because of his ability to cover loose head. I'm not sure how much I buy that because he hasn't played loose head. So somebody will I'm sure somebody will correct me on this if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure he hasn't played loose head since he's come up into senior rugby. Let alone international rugby. So if you're going to do that and say, oh, we're going to pick him to cover both, then surely that would mean you pick one less loose head. So I'm not sure how much I buy that. I think he's a dynamic option off the bench. He is an excellent jackal threat. He's one of the best jackal threats of props in the 4 countries. I think that's a huge thing. That his breakdown work is immense. His carrying is very good. And he's got quite good hands. He's not as good on the ball as someone like Tadhg Furlong, and he's probably not as powerful, but I don't think any other tight head in world rugby is. So he's very similar to Tadhg, except probably more of a breakdown threat and not as powerful. So I can understand why he's gone. Jack Conan, again, big performances get you in, was immense against England. We all remember his acrobatic pass off the long throw of the line out for Keith Earl's try. That was ridiculous skill. He was also excellent against Exeter. At Leinster game. So he's put in 2 massive performances there, and he's a big lad who's really good on the ball. Probably doesn't actually necessarily always play to his size, in my opinion, but when he does, he can change a game. Again, if you want an example of this, 2018, I believe it was, it might have been 2019, Leinster played Ulster in the quarterfinal of the Champions Cup. Leinster were down in the Aviva. Conan changed the game with his carrying and offloading. He has that ability. He hasn't showed it enough, probably due to injury. He's been injured since the World Cup, and then he has had this run. So, but he has that ability. I think personally, from a Leinster point of view, the fact that Conan's gone shows that Caelan Doris, who was probably going to be Leinster and Ireland's 8 this season, if he hadn't have got that head knock at the beginning of the Six Nations that ruled him out the entire time, I think that shows that he probably would have got a spot on the plane if he was fit and played instead of Conan, which is kind of heartbreaking because he's had a meteoric rise in the last year. So to cap that off of the Lions tour would have been fantastic. The big call there is no CJ Stander, Conan instead of Stander. I don't necessarily have as much of a problem with that as some people would. You can call me Leinster biased, but I think Conan offers more on the ball and is more willing to offload at the tackle. And Gatland, even though he's picked the big boys, he did talk about offering a bit of something different. The other huge thing is that Porter's gone instead of Sinclair. I find that incredible. Gatland said it was because of his ability to cover loose head. Again, I've said I don't necessarily buy that.
As you say, sorry Nathan, that doesn't make sense to me either. The fact he's picked 3 loose heads anyway. So
yes, that's why I don't buy it. So is it Porter? Is it Porter that is gone instead of Kyle Sinclair, or is it the Scottish option? You watched a lot more of Ferguson than I have. I have him in my head, correct me if I'm wrong, as a very strong scrummaging tight head who does offer a bit around the park, but maybe not as much as someone like a Sinclair. So is Ferguson going in case Furlong gets injured and you need a scrummaging tight head against the box, whereas Sinclair maybe isn't as good of a scrummager. But anyone who watched Bristol on the weekend would have watched Sinclair absolutely destroy the Bath scrum.
Mm-hmm.
So how much does that weigh up? It's interesting. I mean, I'm sure you can comment on Ferguson a lot more than I can.
Yeah, the thing with Xander though is he did in his early years he broke through Glasgow and Scotland. His scrummaging was average at best for the top level, but it's really like in the last year or so, since Peter de Villiers, obviously ex-France prop, ex-South African scrum coach, he became the Scotland scrum coach, and since he became in as their scrum coach, his scrummaging has just gone just right like that, and he's just I'd say he's like up there with the best of them in the Northern Hemisphere tight heads. Again, I don't think he's as good as Tag Furlong, of course, but and also his carrying as well. He was always a very sort of live wire in the loose stander. He could always carry very well. His carrying's again gone up like that. The concerns I have about him is, as you'll no doubt be aware, in the Six Nations we got a red card. Some could argue he made contact with the head, so I can understand why the red card was given. And again, but also I think slow motion can sometimes look that worse. But I'm not going to have a go at the referee for that, because I fully understand the new directives of the game. So I'm not going to dispute that was a red card. But it's not just that. He can still have his moments sometimes where things either not going his way, or he gives one or two penalties away instead of just backing off a bit and sort of becoming a bit more disciplined. He seems to just not be able to keep his head after he's made giving away 1 or 2 penalties. And he usually ends up giving 4 or 5. So that just things like that kind of get me a bit about him. But I think as an overall rugby player, I mean, his performances against England and France, the Six Nations were absolutely excellent, especially against France, where his carrying was just absolutely immense. I think those things, as well as the fact, I think we've got 2 of the Scottish coaching staff on, sort of going up as part of this coaching team, is a factor as well. Again, so it's a mixed view, that one with the coaching staff, I think, because
there's something to be said for that, because Tadhg Furlong, injury willing, is going to start the first test match.
Yes.
So you're picking someone who's going to come off the bench after 55, 60 minutes to back him up, and probably you're going to go for a more dynamic option over a scrummager on the bench. So in which case, is that going to be Ferguson? Is that going to be Porter? Or is Sinclair the best dynamic option? I probably would be of the opinion that as much as I love Porter, and he does a fantastic job for Leinster and Ireland as that dynamic option who offers a breakdown threat, it's tough to look past Sinclair and the damage that he can do. But the coaching point, again, Robin McBride, Leinster's forwards coach, is in that room. It's a 50-50 call. He's making the call, probably making the argument for Porter, who's making the argument for Kyle Sinclair. So I think, we're never going to know for sure, but I think there might be something.
I've got mixed views on that, considering there's 11 English players going, and they've still got the most representation of all the nations on the tour. So true.
The Kyle Sinclair one does baffle me a bit. I'm not sure which of the 2 tight heads he goes instead of, if it's Ferguson or Porter.
Yeah,
but that one did surprise me.
Yeah, I think maybe the one factor that went against Sinclair is that Ireland-England game where he was just poor. Maybe they were looking into the fact he was just he was getting so wound up, and he was getting in the referee's ear, and there was a couple of times I think the referee penalised him just for being really mouthy at him, from what I remember, and just maybe they were just looking at that and thinking, sort of, do we want someone like that going up against the South Africa if he gets easily wound up, and there, because their forwards are if you read some of the stories of South African packs in the past, they're not exactly renowned for holding back when it comes to giving gap to their opponents up front.
Yeah, I mean, we spoke about there are reasons to not pick people. There's a reason to not pick Sexton. There's a reason to not pick Russell if you want. I mean, there's a big reason to not pick Sinclair, and that is that history of being a bit of a hothead. to be fair to him, I think he's done quite well to kind of get past that. But it's one of those things that it's always going to hang over you. And if it ever flares up again, it's going to come a big. And you're right, big game performances. Sinclair was part of an England front row that in the scrum got pretty much dominated by Furlong. I can't remember. I think Healy went off reasonably early. So I could be wrong. One of Healy or Kilcoyne. So, Sinclair did lose a big battle in the scrum on that day. But if it's an issue of the scrum, Andrew Porter got absolutely dominated by Vincent Koch, the South African loosehead, in the Saracens game in the quarter-final against Leinster last, I think it was September or October, I can't remember exactly when. So, how consistent is the selection? Has Porter improved enough as a scrummager that Robin McBride, who sees him every day, goes, yeah, he's improved from that day, whereas Sinclair's bad performance is more recent? Who knows? There's all these permutations and combinations. The other massive shock I had in the pack, though, was I was surprised that both Johnny Gray and James Ryan got overlooked in favour of Johnny Hill.
Yeah, same. Yeah, same here. I mean, because I thought that James Ryan would be the one who just got it, because I think I had all the other second row options that were there. Like obviously Marrow, Almond Jones, Ian Henderson. I thought would definitely go. Tad Byrne, I thought would definitely go. They were my four, and then the fifth option to me was going to be between James Ryan and Johnny Gray, and another quite left field one. They went for Johnny Hill. But the thing is, I don't know. Part of me is like kind of got in my mind because the 60-meter kick he made against Bristol like the weekend before, just for some reason, I don't know why. I think did Gatland just watch that and just think, oh, he's that guy.
I mean, he's definitely more skillful, I think, than people give him credit for. I would question if he's been picked because as a second row he launched an absolute bomb off his boot. I suspect that's probably.
No, I know it wouldn't be.
It is part of a wider point that he is more skillful than people give him credit for, and probably. I mean, I don't watch as much Exeter as I would watch James Ryan, and I see James Ryan as a very skilled second row who dominates collisions against bigger men. The only time I've ever seen James Ryan struggle has been against Maro Itoje. And he's not playing against Maro Itoje. He's playing with Maro Itoje. Again, he hasn't put up a run of games though. So, and he was in and out of the Six Nations squad with injury. Missed the La Rochelle. No, he didn't miss the La Rochelle game for Leinster. He was part of that, and Big Will Skelton dominated him. I think Gatland referenced that. He said James Ryan was part of a Leinster pack that struggled, but again, so the Lions aren't going to play against Will Skelton. Granted, South Africans' locks are all massive men, but they're not as big as Will Skelton. So again, I think there's a little bit in that has me umming and ahhing. But again, I can see the logic. It's hard to dispute the fact that he hasn't been playing much rugby recently. I think, but the one that frustrates me about James Ryan is that, like I said, he has that history of dominating teams and players that aren't named Maro Itoje. But that wasn't enough to get him in. Whereas somebody like Courtney Laws and even Maro, who has been pretty poor, and again, you want to look for a reason to not pick someone. Discipline is an issue. For the record, I'm not saying they shouldn't have picked Maro. Maro's fantastic. He was always going on that plane. If he sorts out his discipline, he's the best player in the world. But though legacy was enough for those guys, but it wasn't enough for James Ryan, who's been doing it not non-stop for 2 or 3 years. That got me a little bit. Whereas Johnny Hill was poor during the Six Nations with England. He got dropped to the last game against Ireland. Charlie Ewells played it in second row ahead of him. So that one doesn't sit right. And I would have, like, if it was Johnny Gray going ahead of James Ryan, I'd probably feel a little bit better about it because he played really well for Scotland and he's another big lad. But the fact it's Johnny Hill, it doesn't quite sit easy.
Yeah, I think again, so you come back to the endurance thing. The fact he has had head knocks possibly, and he's coming back from that. But I mean, you also going back to the thing you're saying about sort of how he played against La Rochelle when he was again just coming back from a recovered head knock. There could be you could argue there's a bit of contradiction there. The fact he's taking Courtney Laws instead, and Courtney Laws is still injured right now. So yeah, it's you could. I mean, I understand Courtney Laws is probably, as a tackler, it's hard to argue he's a bigger tackler than James Ryan is. But I mean, you still think he's injured. How sharp is he going to be? Does Gatland think he can get him to the ability he needs him to the test? Obviously, he does because he's picked him. But it's just contradictions. I think a wee bit there.
I also the other thing to think about James Ryan is that when he did play for Ireland, Ireland's lineout was one of the best in the tournament. I think. I think was it Ireland did a job on the Scottish lineout, and
yes,
he's a big part about it. I think James Ryan has risen to fame as a man who puts in a hell of a lot of carries and makes a hell of a lot of tackles and dominant tackles against bigger men. Ian Henderson bore a lot of that grunt work in this Six Nations. So Ryan, when he did play, his stats went down, maybe because he wasn't playing as well because he's been injured, but also they would have gone down naturally because Henderson was the dog in that second row, and Ryan was an absolute menace at the line-out. So there's an argument there that if you're looking at the set piece, Ireland's line-out was arguably the best in the tournament, and well, they've taken two of Ireland's line-out operators in Byrne and Henderson, fair enough, but Ryan had a big part to play in that. So there's lots of arguments to be made there. I think Alaman Jones is a good line operator. Maro Itoje is an excellent defensive line operator. So the Lions are probably covered on that front. But sadly, I think maybe the form of Henderson has diminished the good stuff that Ryan has done this year.
Yeah. I mean that's a thing. Like from an Irish point of view, I think you should be proud of, because I was really impressed with Ian Henderson. I thought he was awesome in the Six Nations. I thought Tad Byrne just like he's like the Six Nations, he's gone from like a player who's pretty good to a player who's just looked absolutely awesome throughout the whole tournament. I had him personally as my player of the tournament. From a Scottish point of view, I'm glad Hamish got it. God as I call him. I just think like so both absolutely deserve their spot on the tour. He's
delighted to see Hamish going. I think him and Byrne are very similar in that the knock that has gone against them in the past has been size and can they compete against the bigger players. I think this tournament showed that they can. Watson was dominant, as was Byrne when he played in the second row, and when he was playing at six, he was able to play out of wider channels and show off his handling, and that's something that this pack probably doesn't have as much of as I thought it might. That kind of ball playing back row player. So the fact that both of those guys have got in shows it's not just about size, but both of those, this Six Nations kind of put to bed any concerns about their size.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, interesting to bring size into it though, because I think just going by the three number eights they've got, none of them are like big, sort of powerful ball carriers. They're not like in the mold of obviously Billy Vunipola or CJ Stander at all. And just a quick word on CJ Stander, obviously would have been nice as a career-ending swan song, but Gatlin being who he is, he doesn't go by sentiment all that much. He just goes by what he thinks is the right decision. And as much as I hate to admit it, because 2017 hurt from a Scottish point of view, like most of the time he's got those decisions correct. But what was I going to say? With regards to the ball playing eights, he's gone for number eights who are more athletic, more good with ball in hands, and more quicker and better in the footwork. So I think that's kind of interesting. I think Squid Rugby actually touched on that really well, where we're likely to see whoever starting the test, whether I think it'll be between Faletau and Simmons, maybe Faletau just ahead. So they're going to see them possibly coming up in wide channels quite a lot. They're going to sort of look for to link up a lot more with the wingers.
Remember 2017 Faletau's try in the second test, he was out wide. Gallon will have, I think you're dead right, and Squidge is right. These number eights will be in the wide channels where they can do some serious damage.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, like, obviously all three of them can be decent line-out operators as well with their athleticism. So it's, I think that's in the thinking as well. And with the size thing, again, the whole thing about playing against the box, everyone seems to get obsessed with size. It's like, oh, we need like this big guy to go against this big guy. And to some extent, of course, you do need that for some parity. But at the same time, you don't beat the Springboks by taking them on at their own game. You have to, have a bit of variety, like New Zealand and Australia when they've beaten them. It's never been by just taking them on pound for pound all the time. It's been, trying to, make sure they're getting a platform up front and then spreading it wide and moving their big forwards around as much as possible.
To be fair, I agree with that. And I think they will look to do that. I think the forwards, he will pick someone in that starting pack who's more of a ball playing forward apart from the number 8. I think the two Irish locks are excellent at that. Henderson and Byrne, those things like tip-on passes, that little thing, they're both excellent at that. So I think, so is Alan Wynne, actually, to be fair to him. So I think there will be a little bit of that. I think the main threat obviously comes out wide. I think, Watson's almost dead on to start, Hoggs the counter-attacking threat, and then whether he goes with Reece Zammit or Williams, they're both very good attacking options. So I'm not too concerned about the fact that they'll bring something different. Sam Simmons as well, Gatlin mentioned him by name, that he brings something a little bit different on the ball, variety. it's that 13 shirt. It's that as things stand, they're picking somebody massive in that 13 shirt. I really would have liked to have seen just one of those three names you mentioned earlier, Davies, Ringrose, Slade, to go just in case they need something a little bit different, a little bit more footwork and slightly better linking. Like if Henshaw could end up playing 13 because he has for Ireland recently, and his ability to link the wide channels in and those strike runners out wide is very good. But there's no doubt that someone like a Slade or a Ringrose is probably better. So that's my
sorry, Nathan, just on that, what do you think of Elliot Daly maybe playing that role? Because I think that's the thinking.
Do you think he's in line to play 13? Because he was pretty bad at fullback for England, and it's been a while since he's played 13 at the international.
Yeah, he played 13 for Saracens the weekend before the announcement was made. Okay. I think because he can cover the whole 3/4 line in fullback, I still think at fullback the main choices will be Hoggy and Liam Williams will be the ones main contenders for that role. But no, I mean, I think it is an interesting call that they've picked him, like, because I think the left boot option as well, of course, is there.
I think if you pick if you pick Elliot Daly at 13 for the first test, I think there's argument for him to go to tour because he covers all those positions, yes. But to start a test match against the Box on his form and his lack of game time in that position, I think if Elliot Daly starts that first test match at 13, that makes no sense considering who he's left at home. There are much better players to do that job. Granted, they don't cover as many positions. Has he been picked just because he's got a massive left boot and that might come in the altitude in South Africa, that might come down to win it? Possibly, but I think that would mean he gets a bench job rather than the starting 13 shirt. I think if you start him at 13, it's pointless because, well, no, not pointless, but it just doesn't make a lot of sense because you could have guys who do a very similar job minus the big left boot, but give you more in attack who you've left in the UK and Ireland. So I'm not quite sure. I can understand why he's toured, but I don't think he'll start at 13.
All right. What did you think about Chris Harris maybe starting at 13? Think he's got a shout?
Yeah, I think they all. I think that bar Robbie Henshaw, whether they'll either play him at 12 or 13.
Yeah, Henshaw's definitely starting. I'm just saying that there.
Yeah. But the other spot is massively up for grabs. You said earlier you think it could very much be Bundy and Henshaw. Looking at it now, it could well be, but someone like Chris Harris is definitely looking at Bundy Aki and going, I can definitely overtake that guy and make Henshaw 12 and then Harris 13. It's interesting. I haven't watched enough of Harris. He actually wasn't the Scottish centre that I really wanted to see. I thought if you're going to take a bolter and pick somebody who in the centres, considering the centres is one of the most up for grab positions, I would have picked Redpath just because of what he did to Owen Farrell in the first test in that game. I think he's fantastic. I really rate him. I was gutted he got injured. I think if he didn't get injured and played that Six Nations, I think he would have been a massive shout. And then I really rate him. I haven't watched enough of Harris. From what I've heard, he can perform that role of linking 13 wide channels, and so he can do that in attack and bring in the attacking threats out wide. But I think, am I right in saying his strength is his defense, right?
Yeah.
So he's an excellent defender in that 13 channel. So if you want to pick a defensive option at 13, by all means, I think that makes a lot of sense. And he's another big man. But I still think the question would be there of, is he as good? Like, are you sacrificing some attacking stuff there, considering who you haven't picked?
Yeah, I mean, I personally have a point of view that Chris Harris's attack is a bit underrated by some. I mean, sure, he's not the flashiest, or he doesn't do like the most obvious things like let's say for Scotland, for example, I mean, Hugh Jones, sort of with the way he runs, and he does like stuff that's just kind of like really obvious. He can like beat a man. He can run the angles that can really do damage, and he's got a great pace and a great step on him. Whereas Harris, as you're saying, he does more of the kind of linking work. I'd sort of like describe him. I'm not saying he's as good as this player I'm going to refer to, but I'd describe him sort of as the sort of Conrad Smith type of centre, like where he doesn't do a lot of like, the stuff you think are really flashy. Because I think it's fair to agree when Conrad Smith was with New Zealand, it was more Nat Mahanonu or Sonny Bill Williams who were more the flashy centre, and he was more the sort of organiser and more the centre who just like nip things together and like was sort of like the oil machine. I think Chris Harris can be that type of player. Again, I want to stress, I don't think he's not as good as what Conrad Smith was by any means back in his day. But no, I think, as I say, I think he's that type of player. And I think I think it's similar with Jack Conan, actually. Like, sort of Harris is a bit of a late bloomer. He's coming into playing the best rugby of his life at the age of 30. And Conan's like, he's 28 now, is he? Going to be 29 later this year. And
it's late 20s, yeah.
Yeah, I think because I know he was on the scene a couple of years ago, but it's like now he seems to be in recent months, Conan coming into the best form of his life in his late 20s. And I think that's with similarities there.
That's really interesting to make the Conrad Smith comparison. I think he's a bigger man than Conrad Smith, isn't he? And I think that certainly helps based on what Gatland is looking for. Yeah, I think that center, that second center position, not necessarily second, but the second center who's not Robbie Henshaw is really up for grabs. I think you made a really good point earlier that the fact that Gatland referenced the England performance shows that he's probably looking at Bundy, Robbie right now. But as we all know, things can change very quickly. And I think you're right. If you're not as flashy as some of the other guys on your team, there's some very flash players on that Scotland team. Just look who he has behind him in Hogg. You're not going to get the attention. But, that link-up play is valuable. And clearly Townsend and Gatland appreciate that from Harris. So, yeah, I think he's got a really good chance of starting at 13 alongside Henshaw. It's going to be really interesting to see who gets that nod next to Robbie.
Yeah, absolutely. The one thing, though, I would say, sort of Harris is there's the Lincoln 13. I think, they should be looking for a 9 that offers a bit better support lines, because I think Conor Murray seems to be coming back to near his best. I still don't think he's quite as good as he was in his prime a few years ago before he got injured. But I think, in recent months, he looks like he's coming very good again. It looks like he's going to be the test 9. What do you think of him? Do you think also for Ireland, do you think John Cooney maybe should have been considered a bit more?
I love the John Cooney question. I don't know where I stand on the John Cooney question. I think there's clearly a reason Schmidt didn't pick him and now Farrell isn't picking him. I don't know what that is.
Yes, exactly. I've still asked that to a few folk, and I've yet to hear an answer as to why he's not been picked. But
there must be something that they just don't think he does as well as the other options when they get him into camp. I think the same could be said for Luke McGrath. Before the Six Nations, Luke McGrath was 100% the form 9, which is saying something because Cooney's always in good nick. And Luke McGrath didn't make the Six Nations squad either. So, look, Farrell likes Jameson Gibson Park and what he offers sniping around the fringes. Cooney's probably a better support line runner, like you mentioned. So it's interesting. The Murray point is also a good one. I think, again, big performance against England. He gets on the plane. Interesting that big performance against England was good enough for Murray, but not good enough for Sexton. But anyway, I think Murray was helped by the competition at 9. The competition wasn't as stiff across the country. I think he managed the game really well. Even when he's not in form, his box kicking is always thereabouts. And, that's going to be important in South Africa. The aerial game is always important. He used to be more of a sniping threat around the fringes. You all remember that famous try he scored against New Zealand in Chicago where he dummied around the fringes and went. So he has that running capability. He just hasn't shown it for a while. Can you bank on him showing it between now and then? Who knows? I think the support running line is a very, very interesting question. And I hadn't thought about that, to be perfectly honest with you. And I think someone like Gareth Davies is probably better at that. But everyone seems to think that Gareth Davies is going to be the bench option for a bit of impetus and a bit of injection of speed.
Yeah, with regards to Nathan, with regards to injection of speed with Gareth Davis, I think again, as you're saying, with regards to support lines, he's decent at that. But I still hold the opinion that Gareth Davis's pass for a number 9 is still at the highest level. It's still average at best. It's just and I know there's plenty of Welsh fans who agree with me there. They think Thomas Williams is a much better passer and all-round player.
Williams ahead of Gareth Davies. I'm glad you said his name. I personally like him better as a scrum half. I think I also think he's probably slightly better in support lines. Than Gareth Davies. I think Gareth Davies is that really niggly, kind of, he drives his forwards around the park. He's one of those guys you look at and you hate playing against him. You don't want him again. Like the example I always go to with Davies was whenever Leinster beat Scarlets in the Pro 14 final a few years ago. There was a late break where Joey Carberry offloaded, can't remember who it was, I think it was Dakota, and Davies, the game is gone. He doesn't care about anything. He just decides just to take Carberry out of it and just, we're losing here. I'm going to take Carberry with me and put in a late cheap shot. He's that type of niggly kind of player. And, Gatland maybe values that. And I don't know. I haven't watched his pass and to be honest, so I'll defer to your better judgment there. But I do agree with you. I think Thomas Williams is a better scrum half than him.
Yeah, and I think it's maybe Williams' lack of game time for the Cardiff Blues this season, and the fact he's had a few injuries. He's kind of struggled to get back to like near his best level. Thomas Williams is probably a big factor, but I think as an all-round rugby player, he is a bit better than Gareth Davis. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like I know, so it's weird for me. So like Gareth Davis is a favourite of Gatland's because I wouldn't think he's the style of nine because he's more of a sniping nine. Granted, Reece Webb's a bit of a sniping nine. Is a bit of a sniping nine as well, but he like offers a wee bit more control around the breakdown. He's got a much quicker pass than Davis does. And yeah, obviously Reece Webb can't really be in the conversation, I don't think, because he's not being considered for Wales right now at all. So,
do you think Ali Price goes if Ben Youngs doesn't pull out?
Probably not, to be honest. I thought Ben Youngs was nailed on as the second choice, I have to say. I mean, Ali Price is another one. Like, I think he had good games against England and France, but it's just the stuff he did in the matches against Wales and Ireland that still have my personal worries a bit, because against Wales, like when we were down to 14 men, we just scored the try from Stuart Hogg, got ourselves in front by 4 points, and instead of sort of just controlling things and maybe just taking things on a few phases just to keep the ball for a bit, or just boot it as far down into the corner as possible. He put like a high Gary Owen up, and that was where Wales basically got back into it, and Reece Zammit scored that great try. I'm not taking away the fact it was a great try, but Ali Price shouldn't have kicked it as he did. And then later on, of course, at the end of the game, when we need to keep the ball, he just kicked the ball away again. So his game management in key times, that's something I have a lot of concerns with him still over. But I mean, yeah, Ben Youngs would have been above him, I think.
Against Ireland, don't forget Gareth Davies with the scrum, with 15 seconds on the clock, grubbers it away and into Ireland's 22, and Ireland go the length of the pitch and get a cut, or nearly get a penalty into the corner to win it, all because Gareth Davies kicked the ball away needlessly off the back of the scrum.
Look at it from that. Yeah.
There's history there with both of those scrum halves. It's interesting. We can say we don't think either of them are Gatland players because of the game management, and there are two big examples of maybe the game management lacking. I think those scrum half, nobody really jumped out at the scrum half position this year, did they? And just take that by the scrum. Even though you say like Youngs might have been second choice, I think there were times for England where he didn't offer his usual. I think you talk about suspect passing. I think sometimes when Ben Youngs is playing poorly, it's when he's throwing the ball behind players, or I can't remember exactly what game it was. There was one he just threw the ball in front of a forward runner into touch. He's someone who that can go a little bit as well. So, did Murray do enough to be the favourite for the starting jersey at 9? I don't think so, but I look at the other options and I go, you know what? I can see why people think that.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, if all the nines that are playing international rugby, I want to bring John Cooney's name into this again, because he's the only kind of nine that was really standing out for me of all the nines in the who could have been picked. But again, like if everyone's playing international rugby, I'd say Conor Murray was the head and shoulders above the rest of them. And he's playing well again, but I still don't think he's at that level he was at the last Lions tour.
I agree. I suspect in 10 years' time, when either John Cooney or Andy Farrell writes an autobiography, we'll finally get an answer to the question: why did John Cooney not get more of a look at Ireland?
Well, there's a few theories online. Some of them quite crude, so I won't go into them too much. But yeah. Anything else to talk about? What about the back three options?
Yeah, I mean, not that many surprises. Is Johnny May unlucky? I mean, probably not. They've got Lewis there as this nimble, quick winger. And obviously Anthony Watson is rapid anyway, so fair enough. And then he's gone for the big bruiser and Doohan, Doohan is not slow by any stretch of the imagination, but he's a massive dude who wrecks people, so you can see why he's been picked. Liam Williams as well, he's always going to go just because of his all-round game, and he covers fullback, and obviously Stuart Hogg was the form fullback. I think if he took an extra back three player, I feel a little bit sorry for Hugo Keenan, because he was the second best fullback in the tournament, and I thought was excellent in the situations. But if the decision comes between him and Liam Williams, who covers wing probably better than Hugo does, then fair enough. And I think bar Johnny May and maybe Hugo, I think nobody can really have many complaints about not getting into that back three.
Yeah, that's fair enough, I'd say. Yeah, Hugo Keenan, agreement. I think he's just a bit unlucky, but again, because of how well Liam Williams did on the last tour, and because I think Liam Williams, by his standards, was very mixed bag in the Six Nations, because obviously his two missed tackles late on against two missed tackles that led to England's tries, and then he got yellow carded at the end near the end against France. It just and he was lucky not to get sent off against Scotland, actually, when he put the elbow in towards Darcy Graham. But still, I think, he's another one you could argue maybe a bit of credit in the bank, and, Gatland knows how to get the best out of him. And yeah, as I said, the last Lions tour as well, that would come into his mind as well as to whether he starts this time. I think Hoggy's still just a bit ahead of him, but again,
I think he's a long way ahead of him. I think Hogg's a long way ahead of anybody. Somebody, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I'm reading these reports maybe that, some people are not happy with Hogg's defense and this type of the other. I mean, I don't think anybody is a particularly good defender at fullback, because if you're called in to defend at fullback, you've got three blokes running at you, and odds are you're not going to make a tackle. So I'm not too worried about that. I think he's got a massive bomb of a right boot. We saw that against England. His counter-attacking threat is brilliant, and he was just absolutely sublime in the Six Nations. So yeah, no, Hogg's a long way of everybody else in that 15 jersey. Fingers crossed he doesn't get injured again. 2013 and 2017, he was probably maybe not 2013 because Halfpenny was there, but 2017 he definitely had a serious shout of starting that test tour. Sorry, the tests in that tour, and he got injured. What was the year he got a ball? Was it Conor Murray kicked the ball into his face or something, and he got a broken nose? That was one of them, wasn't it? He missed that the tour. There was some freak accident where he got.
What you talking about, the last Lions tour?
Yeah, was that the last one?
Yeah, he was chasing. He kicked a high ball up and he was chasing it, and Conor Murray basically got in his way and knocked him in the face. Yeah. I think it was his cheekbone he broke or something like that. And
unlucky.
Yeah. From a Scottish point of view, it was quite annoying because it meant we had no Test players in that tournament. But broke my heart like you couldn't possibly believe. But there you go. You got to move on from that. But no, I think, when people talk about Hogg's defence, though, I disagree, because maybe back in 2017, I can see that argument, but with his tackles, he makes far more than he misses. The high ball, sometimes I can understand why folk maybe have the skepticism out there, because there have been a few games, like against Ireland, most noticeably, where he was very, sort of like clunky under the high ball. But also I think partly to that was Ireland's kicking that day was almost that accurate. It was a very difficult for him. But that's the one area I'd still say, you could say it's still a bit clunky. And I also folk, because he made a mistake for Exeter recently against Wasps, where he dawdled a bit too long for kicking, and then Wasps got the try. But I look at it from the angle of, he went on afterwards, and in the second half, he had one of the games of his life, scored 2 tries, and was just absolutely brilliant that second half. And you think that's the angle I'm looking at. You think, okay, he made a mistake, but he more than made up for it afterwards. So
yeah, exactly.
Some folk just want to focus on that one mistake. So
yeah, I mean, I've been saying, look, that issue of focusing on that one mistake, I've been fighting off Leinster fans for years online about focusing on Johnny Sexton's mistakes, and to be honest with you, they're not even mistakes, they're just not getting on the park. So I feel your pain of trying to get people to stop focusing on one mistake, because everybody makes mistakes, but I think the better you are, the more those mistakes kind of get scrutinized, don't they?
Yeah, and also I want to reference what I said a little bit about Ali Price. It's not like so much making mistakes, it's when you make the mistakes, I think, is the key thing. And it's about, especially at that level, it's about keeping yourself composed under pressure, and if you can sort of make sure you're keeping it together when it matters, and you don't do anything stupid. That's the main thing. Although I understand sometimes, I think sort of a bit of risk is needed as well, especially if you're looking for a winning try or a winning play. And again, in those situations, even if you mess up, you're an idiot, and if you get it right, you're a hero. So
welcome to pro sport. Hopefully Ali Price doesn't get charged down again with box kicks.
Oh yeah. That's that. Oh yeah, that was what kind of got me against Ireland as well. He didn't get himself protected enough for that, and then again, as you know, got himself isolated, and Sexton got the penalty and won it. But yeah, anyway. But yeah, I think we've covered most of the positions. Nathan, is is there anything else you want to add or?
Well, I think that's it. I think you can talk about the Lions for hours as we kind of have done here. But yeah, no, I think that's it. I think that those are the main talking points. I'm sure there's probably something we've missed. I can't think of it right now.
Yeah. Look back at this video and there'll be a few things. There always is. But anyway, thank you very much for coming on, mate, and good luck with your work with the Spiral, and keep going with other podcasts and everything else that you're doing, and wish you the best of luck.
Thanks, you too, Kyle. Yeah, cheers for the chat.
Okay, perfect. I really enjoyed that. Thank you very much for watching, guys. Take care of yourselves, and I'll catch you later on.